Hi there, how are you doing? This is Brian Junker in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and this is week 2 of the Coursera course, Introduction to Music Production. And this week I'm going to tell you about adding a software instrument to the DAW I'm using, which is Reaper. And I'm going to use that instrument to record a MIDI bass line to go along with an acoustic recording that I already made. So here we go. So I want to start by showing you the keyboard that we're going to use. I actually don't own a MIDI keyboard, but it turns out my son does, so I borrowed his keyboard, and here it is. It's an Akai MPK Mini. You can see the dials for the control codes here. There are pads if you want to enter a drum part or something like that, and below there's a 2-octave keyboard at the bottom. And you can see that there's a USB cable coming out of it that connects this keyboard to my laptop. The first thing we have to do is go find a software instrument that's free that we can install. So what I've done, you can see on my screen here, I've got a couple of windows open. This is the Reaper DAW that we'll be using. Over here is a Google search page where I've typed in free bass VST because these software instruments are VST plugins. And the first one here, VST for free, gives us free guitar and bass plugin, so I'll click on that. And the very first entry here, Forefront Bass, is the one that I've installed, so I'll show you what I did. We click on that, and we get a description of the plugin, and if we want to, we could listen to the plugin. There's a nice little YouTube recording of it, and since I have the 64-bit version of Reaper installed, I'm going to select the 64-bit version of the plugin. And you can see here that what we have to do is save this zip file somewhere. I'll save it in my downloads directory and then open it from there. And you can see there's a DLL file. This is the actual plugin. We go over to the directory where Reaper lives, and we find the plugins directory, and in this case I have a subdirectory called other plugins, and I'm going to take the DLL and drag and drop it into my other plugins file. I actually did this before, so you can see the plugin there. I could replace it, but it's the same plugin, so I think I'll leave it as it is. Once we've done that, then we're all done with the installation process. When we open Reaper up, it will automatically find that plugin, and then we have to make a couple of setting adjustments in Reaper in order to have Reaper find the keyboard that we've plugged in, that Akai keyboard I mentioned earlier. So we're going to go over here to Options and Preferences, and the first thing we're going to do is go to MIDI Devices, and you can see MPK MIDI is one of the possible input devices. We're going to double click on that, enable input from the device, and enable control messages from the device. Once we've done that, we never have to do that again. We don't have to do anything else here. Okay, once Reaper is set up to work with the MIDI keyboard, we're going to bring in a file that has a recording of a couple of acoustic instruments. We're going to add a bass line to this recording. Okay, so just to give you an idea what the thing sounds like, here we go. Okay, that's enough to give you a sense of what it sounds like. Now we're going to go back and add the bass line. So we need to set up a track for recording MIDI, so we double click to get a track. Now we're going to arm it for recording, and we'll set the input, instead of coming from the speaker which you hear now, this input's going to come from MIDI. And then we have to use the effects here to bring in the software instrument that we installed earlier. That's the Forefront Bass module. Now that's installed for this track. We're ready to go. And the last thing we have to do is click here, because record monitoring is off. We want to be able to monitor the track so we can hear it. So let's try this. Let's see what happens. we're just going to come in on the downbeat right after the pickup and play a little bass under the guitar and banjo. Alright, that gives you a pretty good idea what it's like. So let's stop there. We're going to save the track that we just recorded. And now let's rewind it so we can hear what it sounds like. Okay, that's enough. One thing you'll notice is that the bass seems to be coming in ahead of the beat pretty consistently. Here's a fix for that. There's many ways to fix that, but in this case we're just going to reposition the track so that it lines up with the beginning of the downbeat here. So we'll put a marker so we know roughly where the downbeat happens. Roughly there. Okay. And then we're going to come down here, and if I hold down Shift and then click left click rather, then I can move the track in very small increments until the beginning of that bass line beat lines up with the beginning of the downbeat in the banjo track. Okay, now it will sound like this. Okay, one other thing we can do is we can edit the individual notes in the MIDI track. We can do that in Reaper by double-clicking on the MIDI track, and then we get this piano roll representation that Loudon talked about in class, or in his lecture rather. You can see what things look like here. These are the individual notes, and these are the velocities that are encoded as volume of each individual note. If we play that again, you might notice that this note started a little bit early. Adjust the attack of this one so it comes a little bit later, and now it sounds like this. So that works pretty well, and pretty much where I'd like to be now with this note. The other thing I can do is adjust the velocities. So I didn't hit the notes with equal velocity, so the volumes aren't all the same. I can bring them all up to sort of a common level here. Now all the notes are at about the same velocity, about the same volume, and the passage sounds like this. So that's about it. I've shown you how to find a software instrument online, install it in your DAW, set the settings that are needed in the DAW to recognize the MIDI keyboard, and then use the MIDI keyboard to add a bass line to an existing recording, and finally adjust the recording using the piano roll representation of the MIDI bass line here. There's a couple of things I didn't get to. I didn't talk about setting a metronome to start, which means that the grid lines here are not so useful as they were in the example that Loudon showed in his lectures. One can do that. That's a very useful thing to do. But it's also useful to know that this is still possible even if you haven't set the metronome, set grid lines, and things like that. Thanks a lot for watching. I look forward to your comments. Bye now.